Our political correspondent says the British government appears to be in chaos. World leaders made a commitment to halt deforestation at the COP26 summit last month, but a particular type of woodland is especially important for wildlife and for the air we breathe. And the significance of old growth or native forests is increasingly being acknowledged by conservationists in the United States. Noel Evans now reports from a rare urban forest in Rochester, New York State.
Washington Grove is a unique kind of wilderness nestled in the urban sprawl of the city of Rochester on Lake Ontario. Andrew Seeger has been looking after these woods for 13 years as a leader of a local conservation group. He says the eldest tree found here was about 270 years old when it fell. He's originally from Botswana in Africa, home to the Kalahari Desert. But for Seeger, his spiritual home is found underneath 3 tall oak trees at the center of this forest.
It's just the feeling of being able to stand so easily between these old giants. They create a different understanding about time for me. I can get very caught up in the moment.
No one knows for sure how much old growth there was within U.S. borders before settlers arrived from Europe. There's been no official count. The U.S. Forest Service estimates that only 13% of the country's timberlands are more than 100 years old. But with an increasing awareness among communities of the need to protect their environment, more are being designated all the time. Trees age differently, depending on their type. But for scientists, there is one universal characteristic of old growth: complexity.
Not only will you normally have some very large trees, but they have this unusual shape to their canopies.
Ecologist Joan Maloof.
So instead of having wide branching limbs, they have these kind of thicker, more gnarly limbs. There's going to be more dead logs on the forest floor. And those ecosystems there are actually richer than the ecosystems found on the living trees.
10 years ago, she started the Old Growth Forest Network, which has just designated Washington Grove a member of its nationwide club. Her vision is to preserve an old-growth forest in every part of the country. So far, 28 states out of 50 have at least one woodland in the network. That fallen wood that Maloof mentioned are sometimes called legacies, and they're important to the health of this kind of forest. So Andrew Seeger and the Rochester Conservation Group mostly leave those alone.
That untidiness is part of the beauty of this grove. And often old trees will come down and they may take a couple of new ones with them, and that's part of what happens in a forest. And we get a clearing of light from which emerges all sorts of stuff.
The forest ecosystem encourages new plants and insects, feeding wildlife and promoting future growth. This kind of mature woodland is also good at combating pollution. Compared to young, spaced-out trees along a street or in a manicured park, climate scientist William Muma says old-growth forests are far more powerful when it comes to pulling carbon from the atmosphere.
If we were to set aside some of our forests and we allowed enough of the trees of the forest that are already, 50 to 70 years old to keep growing to that potential that they have, that would accumulate significant amounts of additional carbon out of the atmosphere.
He backs financial incentives to prevent old trees being cut for profit, like schemes already established in parts of Asia, Africa, and the Americas.
It's the same as giving subsidies to people to put solar panels on their roof, and all of society benefits from that.
Back in Washington Grove, the sun filters through the site. It's just 1/10 of a square kilometer, but it's full of wildlife. Foxes, hawks, owls, and chipmunks all live here. Andrew Seeger walks through his beloved woodland with joy and a sense of peace, knowing that these trees will live on to inspire future generations.
In Native American tradition, these would be the tree people, and they've been around a lot longer than I. And when I get really anxious, this is a good place to come and say, you've seen a lot more than I, and I can just stand here for a few seconds and calm down and become more grounded.
Andrew Seeger ending that report from New York State by Noel Evans. You're listening to Weekend. In a moment, I'll introduce you to my two guests who are with me for the rest of the programme. Before that, the latest news headlines.
This is the BBC World Service, where Susan Stone is telling the story of the parcels that changed lives across continents.
75 years ago, war had torn the world apart. Europe lay in ruins. Life for the survivors was a daily struggle.
Everything